We have started. Yes.
Mhm.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Muhi Khwaja. I am a trainer at Fundraising Academy with National University, and we are elated to be talking about donor advised funds. Here, we're going to learn all about maximizing donor impact. And Fundraising Academy is proud to welcome Bloomerang as our exclusive webinar series sponsor starting this month. Due to their generous support, we're able to continue to provide our monthly webinars filled with practical, timely guidance in a rapidly changing sector at no cost. So, each of you are here for a reason. You want to learn, you are a fundraiser, you're an executive director, you're a board member, and you have a mission that you want to support. So, Fundraising Academy is here to help you learn how to fund it. And you can check out our portal. We'll share a little bit more resources later today. So, this is me. As I said, I'm a trainer with Fundraising Academy. In my day job, I am the co-founder of the American Muslim Community Foundation, and I actually manage 300 donor advised funds. So I'm actually really excited to see what Jack and Bree have to share, and I'm here to learn as well. So it's an honor to be here, and anytime I have an opportunity to share more with Jack and Bree. It's always a pleasure. I've had the opportunity to meet both of them at the San Diego Fundraising Conference and also Cultivate from Fundraising Academy. Bree is a CFRE, an MPA, an AFP certified trainer. We share those accolades, so it's good to be in the vicinity of amazing people. And she's building the future of philanthropy. She is the AVP of Philanthropy Activation at Digital Health Strategies. She brings deep cross-sector expertise to nonprofit health systems, equipping them with data intelligence, AI-powered fundraising tools, and the infrastructure to fund mission at scale. She's a speaker, an educator, and deeply committed to practicing our profession with rigor, ethics, and accountability. Jackalato, what can I say? That's why many of you are probably here on this webinar. He is a mentor, a friend, just the best person ever. Jack is a graduate of Glassboro State College and the State University of New York at Oswego, and both degrees are in psychology. Throughout his career, Jack has served in a variety of fundraising positions in hospitals, social service, and arts sector as executive director, development director, major gift and legacy giving manager, and foundation and corporate relations manager. Jack is a CFRE Ambassador at the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy at JFK University. Jack was an instructor at Fundraising Academy. In 2019, he joined as a trainer at Fundraising Academy at National University. So we're here to learn, we're here to have fun. You are all in great hands with Jack and Bree. Take it away.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mui. And I'm going to let Bree she'll do our objectives. But thanks, Mui. Thank you so much for the introduction.
Yes, Muhi, thank you. I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. I know Jack and I are both in flight these days, and I'm sure many of you have had that experience. I am speaking to you from Phoenix, Arizona, though my home base is typically Peoria, Illinois. Jack, where are you today?
So I am in St. Louis, Mo, and I am at the GiveCon conference, which is Bloomerang's conference, by the way. And I just earlier today did a paper on moves management. So I'm doing a double header today. I think I should get paid twice as much. What do you guys think?
I love it. I
I think
love
it's only
it.
fair. Yeah.
And and I see lots of folks joining us from across the US and Canada. Welcome and thank you so much for being here today. I think there's a lot to cover in what we have to talk about today, and I think certainly this is not exhaustive, but we are welcoming any questions that you have in the chat, and certainly afterwards we'll have opportunities to connect. Before we dive in, though, I really want to set the stage for what we hope to accomplish in our time together today, because I do want you all to walk away with something actionable and more than just what a sense of a DAF is. By the end of the session, you'll be able to define donor advised fund and explain how it works. You'll have that vocabulary to be able to speak fluently to donors and your colleagues. You'll understand where DAFs sit in today's philanthropic landscape. I think we probably have all seen those reports that they continue to grow as one of those vehicles that donors are using. You'll know who those DAF donors are. What does their profile look like? How does it compare to major giving, principal giving, and your annual fund type donors? What motivates DAF donors? And then you'll have some concrete actionable strategies for you to maximize DAF giving at your organization. I think, Muhi, you've got a poll for us, and that's how we'll kick this off.
Yeah. How many years of fundraising experience do you have? And that's the first one that we'll be launching. And the second question is, does your organization currently accept gifts from DAFs? We're at about 70% participated, getting a lay of the land. We'll give it just another second. Get your questions and responses in. All right. So about 40% of you have more than 11 years of experience, 25% of you with 6 to 10 years experience, 22% with 2 to 5 years experience, and 10 of you are newbies with under a year. Welcome. We're glad that
Welcome,
all of
welcome,
you are here.
welcome.
And 90% accept gifts from DAFs, 2% are said no, and 8% are unsure. So hopefully we'll help you get that number to 100%.
Excellent.
I see, Claire, you've noted that you have 6 months of experience. Welcome to the field, and you don't know what a DAF is. Well, after today, you will. That's
Yeah,
great.
definitely.
No,
Excellent.
I think it's great, Jack, when we see folks from all levels of experience to taking an interest in this. And we all learn from each other. So certainly feel free to use that chat too to share and connect as we go through this. So what exactly is a donor advised fund? Basically, you can think of it like a philanthropic investment account. A donor makes their initial gift to a sponsoring organization, typically at either a wealth management or, as Muhi mentioned, a community foundation. And then that gift is invested and it grows over time. The sponsoring organization provides administrative support and investment expertise. That's one of the benefits of having a donor advised fund. But the donor then gets the immediate tax benefit from investing at that point, and then they can recommend, as it's invested and continues to grow, how to make grants to charities over time. So that's typically what the DAF journey looks like for a donor. They create their DAF at a sponsoring organization, which itself is a charity, which is why they get that tax benefit at the initial gift. And then they advise the organization, they set up a framework to advise that organization about what types of nonprofits that they care about. And then that organization is the one that actually executes the grants and ultimately makes the decision on where those grants go to. We know from research that DAF donors treat philanthropy as a strategic decision-making process and often have their own research, their own values, and long-term planning, which is why they like to work with these organizations that have this expertise. Um, Before we get into this any further, I'm curious what worries you all about DAFs. What are some of the things that you are concerned about? Whether it's I don't even know what they are, I don't know how to accept them. Um, Maybe these gifts are anonymous and I don't know who to talk to. Um, Feel free to drop that in the chat. Yep, not knowing, Michelle. Yep, exactly. Not knowing what the DAF, who the DAF came from. Distance from the
Yeah.
donor. Yeah. How can you encourage that? Oh, that you have an odd topic. You know, Cabrina, it's interesting to me as I've done from the fundraising standpoint, looked at DAFs. Some of these DAF donors, they establish a fund that is so specific, you'd be surprised what they would fund, right? They definitely have very specific interests.
Yeah.
Reach DAF donors. Jack, what about you?
I see Lindsay's really on top of the local news or the news, the current news, which is, a DAF sponsor refusing to make a gift to a certain nonprofit. I think she's speaking specifically about the Southern Poverty Law Center,
Yeah,
and where two DAF sponsors said that they would not honor requests from their donors to make a gift to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And by the way, guys, just last week, AFP Global came out with their response to it. So I urge you guys to find that and read that because I think it's important. And definitely, there's a lot of controversy. I mean, we could spend the next hour and a half.
right.
Certainly, we all have our own opinions. Muhi, Bree, and I both would probably have an opinion. But I've never, other than this recent news, I would just say this, that the Southern Poverty Law Center is still a 501c3 organization. No one, and they've only been indicted, whatever that means. They haven't been convicted of anything. And I think it's something that we really need to watch very closely. Let me just say that much.
Yeah,
There is two great articles that you could read about this. One is published on April 30th in the Chronicle of Philanthropy by our good friend Rashida. And I urge you to read that. It's an excellent article. If you don't get the Chronicle of Philanthropy, you could probably download it on some listserv, or people are talking about it quite a bit. So I'll leave it there for now, but certainly you could reach out to either Bree, myself, or Mui to ask our own personal opinions about how we think. But I see some other things in there too,
yeah,
Bree.
yeah. Well, and what's interesting to me is all of these concerns that seeing you raise makes me think of how do I treat DAF donors differently than my typical process for identifying and cultivating and stewarding major gift, principal gift donors, annual fund donors. And you're absolutely right that this is different, right? Because the donor has made their gift to establish the DAF. And so you're often having to navigate working with the sponsoring organization, whether that's a community foundation or a wealth management company, and to the question of how do we find DAF donors? Often it is through those community foundations, connecting with those community foundations and understanding what kinds of funds that they have available. At the same time, they do have an advisory capacity to how those funds are executed. And I think, Jack, what you've hinted at with the recent news is at the end of the day, the sponsoring organization is the one that executes the grant.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. One thing I wanted to note in some of the comments I'm seeing, DAF's not accepting qualified charitable distributions from retirement accounts. So, you can work more strategically with an individual who's of retired age and can access their um, IRA, and if they don't need their required minimum distribution to live off of, they can donate up to $100,000 to a charity. I believe there's some laws that are looking into how to change this, or amounts, or the age, or if they can go to DAFs. So that would be a game changer in the future. But of course, there's also a lot of critique around donor advised funds about it being a hoarding mechanism for the wealthy and this, that, the other. I've always been of the mindset of flipping the script and making grassroots donor advised funds through American Muslim Community Foundation. And I think working with community foundations is, in my experience, often easier to build relationships with the donors who have DAFs than it is a Fidelity charitable or a Schwab charitable or a Daffy or Charity Vest or any other platform that is simply only a DAF sponsor. When you have a community foundation, they understand the nonprofit community. They
Yeah,
have programs and services and want to help build those connections.
yeah.
So just a little point of clarification as I see
Yeah,
some of the comments come
you
in.
know, Bree, I don't know if you have the Q&A up, but our good friend in Canada, Carolyn Cummings, who is in Ottawa. Hi, Carolyn. It's good to see you. I saw her at AFP Icon. She has a question in there. What is involved in becoming a DAF sponsoring organization? And she, of course, is in Canada. And I don't know. What do you think, Bree? What is involved for a
Sorry,
organization?
Jack, did you?
It's a form of 501(c)(3).
Yeah, so
Yes,
whether
yes.
it's different in
Yeah,
Canada or not, I think that's the main question.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about our friends north of the border and how many community foundations are up there doing it. And of course, sponsoring organizations in Canada, Carolyn, Fidelity also is a sponsoring, Vanguard, some of the major sponsoring organizations here in the States. I like to say that the United States is your province to the south. So definitely we share many things. And you know what? Something I learned just as an aside, it's not in our PowerPoint, but cross-border DAF giving is growing. People in the US are giving to charities in Canada and vice versa. And our two countries, we have a treaty that enables that to happen. And so, for those of you like Carolyn, I know there are other Canadians in Toronto, et cetera. Definitely look into that. It's doable. DAFs in the U.S., donors in the U.S. can make cross-border gifts. It's because we have a treaty with our friends in Canada. Sorry to interrupt, Bree. I know.
No, no. Well, Jack, I think it is, as we're talking about that ecosystem of community foundations, do you want to talk a little bit about the
Sure.
community foundations, the number, and who the
Yeah.
largest are?
So I always like to start with my friends in Canada. There are 206 community foundations in Canada. In fact, every year that I looked at, your number of community foundations are growing. In fact, in 2024, there were 200, and now there are 206 community foundations. And I did a little homework on Toronto Community Foundation because it's a very large foundation, of course, in Canada, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. In the U.S., there are about 900 community foundations, and there are some single sponsor foundations. I think the American Muslim Community Foundation might be considered. What, Muhi, let me know as a single sponsor, having a single focus. So, for example, besides the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego is a single sponsor. In fact, they have close to $1 billion in their foundation. In the U.S., there are 103 national sponsors: Fidelity, Vanguard, DAF Giving 360, which is the Schwab sponsor, and they're all those three big ones are also in Canada. Schwab Charitable changed their name to DAF Giving 360. So they're there. National Philanthropic Trust in the U.S. and Bank of New York Charitable and the American Endowment Foundation are the largest sponsoring organizations both in the U.S. and in Canada. Bree, what about community foundations in the U.S. and in Canada?
Yeah, well, you mentioned I think you mentioned the Toronto Foundation with more than 8.4 billion in assets, supporting more than 1,000 fund holders. And this is from 2024, so a little bit of delayed data, so I'm certain that it's grown. And they also offer social impact investing from their funds, which I know, Jack, you'll talk about later in our presentation. I do see a question, and I'm hoping that we'll get to this when we get to terms and concepts, but defining the difference between community foundation sponsor organizations and single sponsor organizations. In the US, the Silicon Valley Foundation is the largest with 10.29 billion in assets. And they made $1.3 billion in grants. So I think that's what we're seeing, like this growth of how much these DAFs hold and how much they're granting out. And I saw the question from Claire of like, why would a donor give to establish a DAF or give to a DAF rather than directly to an organization? And we'll get into that as we talk about donor characteristics and motivations. So Jack, do you want to start going through some of those key
Sure.
terms
Yeah.
and
So
definitions?
yeah, so in Canada, also Ottawa Community Foundation, they actually helped establish a second community foundation with a $1 million gift. And I've seen that happen both here in the US and in Canada, where one found community foundation is trying to help establish another one. The Vancouver Foundation has 1.1 billion in assets. For those of you in Canada, the Calgary Foundation has 1.7, and those numbers are as of 2025. So
Oh,
they've grown quite a bit. So let's talk about some terms, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions about, what is a donor? What is a sponsoring organization? What is an advisor? And Bree, if you're watching, if there's some question as we go through this,
yeah,
interrupt
I'll
me,
go ahead.
please, or Muhi, interrupt me, whatever. I'm happy to do that. So here's the way I look at this whole DAF thing as a journey. A donor wakes up one morning and says, I want to establish a DAF. I want to do that. And I'm going to make a gift to a DAF. When they make that gift, and by the way, a gift to a DAF doesn't only have to be from an individual, it could be from a corporation, it could be from a foundation, it could be from any number of donors that we would work with. They make a gift and then they get an immediate tax deduction because when they make a gift to a sponsoring organization like Fidelity or the American Muslim Community Foundation, they are making a gift to a 501c3 and they get immediate tax deduction. Then what they do is they make a recommendation to the sponsoring organization to make a grant. So, for example, let me just put it this way. I make a gift of, say, $25,000 to the Marin Community Foundation, and then I get an immediate tax deduction for the 25,000, and then I say, please make a gift to the homeless shelter in Marin. Make a grant. So then I am an advisor. I'm advising the community foundation or the sponsoring organization to make that that grant to that organization. Here's the thing I think that may cause some confusion. So I'm an advisor. It's called donor advised fund. That's what we are. The donor becomes the advisor once they make the gift. And then the sponsoring organization makes sure that the charity is qualified, that it's a 501c3 and that it's qualified to make a gift. So we say this, the original donor to the DAF is the advisor and the grantee is the organization that receives a gift. There are lots of sponsoring organizations. Now, the question I saw and guys, feel free to chime in, is, what is the difference between a sponsoring organization and a community foundation? And for me, I think the major difference is that there are many community foundations which also have endowments. They might have an endowment, and I'm pretty sure like Marin Community Foundation has an endowment, Silicon Valley Community Foundation has an endowment, the Toronto Community Foundation has an endowment. Vanguard and Fidelity and maybe some of the other sponsors may not have endowments because they don't make gifts separately other than the gifts that are part of their donor advised fund system. So, for example, Marin will make a gift from their endowment to nonprofits, but they also make gifts from their donor advised funds when an advisor instructs them to do that. I hope that makes it clear. Yeah, it's tough. So, and the grantee is the organization that receives the grant. This this hard and soft credits in the database causes lots of confusions, guys, and I'm going to try to clarify that. So when a donor writes a personal check to your organization, you give them hard credit. The check signer gets hard credit. It's even if it's a corporation or a foundation. Soft credit goes in a donor advised fund. The hard credit goes to the sponsoring organization or the community foundation, but then soft credit goes to the advisor. And I see a lot of discussion and discussion boards on AFP Global. Anything you'd like to add to that, Bree or Muhi?
Well, I
That
think
soft
there's
credit.
so many questions coming in, and I want to make sure that I respond to some of them that we haven't hit on yet. So Taylor asks about immediate tax deduction being the reason why an organization can't book a pledge from a DAF, like multi-year
Yeah,
gift. Or I think there was
good
another,
question.
yeah.
So here's the thing. It's a language problem. You can't book a pledge, but you can book a commitment to say like a capital campaign. It's just a question. And I just looked this up before we got on because I knew this question was going to come up. When you get you can't say in your database that I have a pledge to a capital campaign, but you can book it as a commitment. It's just a little language game that we have to play because a pledge is something different. It means that you're actually absolutely have to do it, but a commitment is a little bit different. It's just a nuanced term. So when you do, whoever asked that question, book it as a commitment and not as a pledge. Okay?
I
Bree?
think Jack to that point, right? Like there are some legal implications of what where you can give DAF gifts. Like DAFs can't buy gala tickets and golf tickets, those kinds of things, right? They need to be pure charitable deductions or pure charitable gifts. And so all of this is about having those same kinds of conversations that you would have with your regular donors that you would with DAF donors, or when you're having conversations with your regular donors, incorporating DAFs if they have them, as well as, gifts at the moment, planned gifts, and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And, just looking at the fundraising landscape, we're going to give you some good references, guys, to look up. There's books out there. And
Yeah.
my favorite book, of course, is A Daft Revolution by Ted Hart. And we'll give you that reference in the last slide. It's really good. So what does the fundraising lands? I hope that helps. And guys, interrupt with questions, Bree or Mui, and I'll do the same when you guys are talking. So the growth of DAFs in the US and Canada. Listen to these numbers. Listen to this. And I won't go through all of them because you could get them on the slides later on. So these are numbers from 2023 and 2024 and the percent change. Okay. So the number of DAF accounts in the US and Canada in 2023 was 3,030,000. That's 2023. In 2024, it was 3.5 million, almost 3.6 million. So there was an 18.5% change in the number of deaths. That's astonishing. I bring that statistic to you because it says to you as fundraisers, pay attention. It's the fastest growing giving vehicle in the world in both the US and Canada. So people ask, all of those anonymous DAFs, only 4% of DAFs are anonymous. And you know what? Typically, you'll be able to figure who it is, and one of the things I say in other trainings that I've done with DAF is that make relationships with the sponsoring organizations and with the community foundations. For example, make a relationship with, if you're getting a DAF gift from the American Muslim Community Foundation, have a relationship with someone like Muhi so that you could build a relationship with that person. If it's the Toronto Community Foundation, make a relationship with us. I was in Albuquerque recently, and I looked at the community foundations in New Mexico, and I sent a brief note to the Santa Fe Community Foundation, which is the largest in New Mexico. And I just sent and it went to a box called info at Santa Fe Community Foundation. And, I thought, well, I would really like to get a response from a real person. And I got a response. So they're out there. They want to speak with you. So, it's really important that we do that. Here's some information, and here's another source, and you'll see it in our references. Jacob Pruitt. Jacob Pruitt is the CEO, or I'm sorry, he's the president of Fidelity Charitable. Okay, Fidelity Charitable is the one of the big. I think it's the largest sponsoring organization in the world. And so here's what he said, and I'm just going to briefly tell you some things. And this is from a report he gave in 2025. It's a letter he wrote to everybody, like the world. And here's what he said. In 2024, Fidelity Charitable converted a significant amount of non-publicly traded assets. So what are non-publicly traded assets? It's property, it's farms, it's houses, it's all kinds of things, artwork, whatever. And they converted that to cash. And here's something that I found really interesting in his letter. Fidelity Charitable in 2024 converted $786 million worth of cryptocurrency into cash. That's what they did. 786 million. So I urge you guys to investigate that. Read his letter to the public. Grants went to a record that in 2024, Fidelity Charitable gave 213 gifts to unique nonprofits. That's huge. What are some of the donor giving patterns? Listen to this. Donor giving patterns remain steadfast to organizations and causes that move them. He said, that's who gives. When your organization moves them and links with donors, they make gifts to them. Okay. On average, 75% of the donors that DAFs contributed were awarded within 5 years. Now, somebody mentioned, I think, Bree, you told me that someone said that it's a place where they could house money and not use it. That's not true as it relates to Fidelity. 75% of those dollars that donors contributed were awarded within 5 years. So that it's not just languishing there. 95% of DAF grants to nonprofits included the account name of the recommending donors' names and addresses. So it's a very small percentage that is anonymous. In 2024, and I'll go through this quickly, 67% of contributions to Fidelity Charitable were in the form of non-cash assets. And as I said earlier, 786 million in cryptocurrency. So donor advised funds, whether at a sponsoring or at a community foundation, are receiving assets because they're big gifts. It could be stock, it could be cryptocurrency, as I told you, it could be property like a house or a farm. It could be all kinds of things. So listen to this final stat that I'll give you. In 2015, the number of DAFs held by Fidelity was 80,152. 80,152. And by the way, guys, you're going to be able to get all these slides with all these notes. So 80,152 in 2015. In 2024, just 9 years later, the number of DAFs held by Fidelity was 217,402. The number of donors in 2015 was 132,190 DAF donors. In 2024, it was 352,052. So you could see DAFs are growing exponentially, guys. In 2024, and this statistic you're going to love, 64% of grants were designated where needed most. 64% of DAF gifts from Fidelity were where needed most. You know what that tells you? That's unrestricted money, and we all crave unrestricted money. So, Bree mentioned the one of the things that I love visiting the Toronto Community Foundation website is they have a fund called Impact Investing. And so does Fidelity Charitable. In fact, I met a community foundation person here today at the seminar I did, and she said they also do impact investing. And those of you in the social service sector should really pay attention to this because this is really key. What is impact investing? What it is recoverable grants. Donor advised funds can make a microfinance like say to help housing in a community, or they can give a loan to with no interest to a nonprofit organization. There's lots of things that is growing. Listen to this statistic. In
Hey,
2020,
Jack. I,
yes,
I I think it's important too to tie all of these statistics that you're talking about to, especially these questions of like who DAF donors are. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are these organizations, these sponsoring organizations that can receive gifts in the same way that your organization can, right? All of those different cryptocurrency and property and et cetera that you
yep,
mentioned. But then to the point of who are they granting out to? And all of these sponsoring organizations, these community foundations, um, what you mentioned about many of those gifts were given to unrestricted giving. So
right,
while we mentioned, and I know somebody at the top of this call said, we have a really strange case for support or a very specific thing that we're funding. There's a lid for every pot I
that's
find
right,
in
that's
these
right,
DApps.
yeah,
But
yeah,
also, very notably, is that the fact that there is a preponderance of unrestricted gifts coming out of
yep,
DApps. So while
yep,
donors may advise, here's a very specific thing that I'm interested in. I worked a lot with organizations in Montana, and there are a lot of Native organizations, and some of those DAFs and community foundation funds are very specific that we want to grant to Native organizations. So looking for those types of organizations that do the kind of work and support the kind of work that you do, yes, but there's also opportunity for unrestricted giving as well.
yeah,
There's a lot of good
yeah,
questions that are happening in the chat too, and
yeah.
I just want to make
And
sure that we're connecting this to like what people can do
good.
with this
Thank you for
information.
doing that. I think it's really important. I think that all these statistics, and you could, like I said, get them in the PowerPoint later on, are just I'm bringing them all out there just to show all the ways that DAFs are changing the fundraising landscape going
Yes.
forward.
Yeah.
And we talked about pledges before for capital campaigns. A DAF cannot be used as a pledge, but it can be used as a commitment for capital campaigns. And we'll talk a little bit more about endowed DAFs, which are growing also exponentially. So all of these things about taking cryptocurrency or assets or inactive DAFs or unrestricted funds, I think we're bringing them all to you guys because we want you to pay attention to this. There's so many social impact funding, all both in the US and Canada. It's all of these things are growing in DAFs, and I just think it's important for us to pay attention to it because it is a vehicle, a giving vehicle, which is moving quite rapidly. Having said that, Bree, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some
Yeah.
donor characteristics and motivations.
Yeah, well, and so I think this first question, how can I find out more about my DAF donors? How can I find DAF donors? Chris asks, how do we connect with wealth advisors? I mean, think about this as you are offering a service to their the people that they serve as well, right? Is helping to educate their uh the people who have their wealth accounts, right? I always think it's important to have connections to wealth advisors, and working closely with them because you're working hand in hand. You're not a tax advisor, you're not a wealth advisor necessarily in your role, but you can connect with those organizations who, when they're working with their clients, can say, "Oh, I know that this organization can accept DAF grants," and so you become part of their roster. Also, getting connected with those community foundations. I know a lot of community foundations have consortiums that kind of work together, and so learning a little bit more about that and how they work with their donors and set up DAP funds as well is really important. Jody, you're speaking my language about grateful patient fundraising and grateful patient and family fundraising. That DAPs are absolutely a vehicle. I think this is just another thing in your toolkit to be knowledgeable about. I mean, I think when we prepare for the CFRE, we're always like, oh, do I have to be an expert in plant giving? Do I have to be an expert in DAFs? No, you don't have to be an expert, but know about it so that when you're working with your donors, um, that you have that tool in your toolkit. So how can
Yeah.
you learn more about DAF donors? And I saw in the chat as well that that somebody was expressly told that they needed to send the receipt to the DAF organization, right, to the housing organization, and that's absolutely right. And I think it back to that sort of hard and soft credit. Um, this is more about your donor recognition in your database. And I understand that a lot of databases are paved by record. And so I think if your donor, the originating donor of the DAF, is not another type of donor, then they may just be like embedded within. Like I've often seen where it says, Schwab Charitable Fund, and then like in the notes section, may have like who is associated with that. That being said, there are many folks that hold their DAF funds within the same organization. So just to be aware of that as well when you're doing some recording.
Yeah. One thing that I'd like to share as well is, as many of you, like I've been a major gift officer, I've been a chief development officer, I've been, in various roles from a large development staff team to a one-person development shop. One of the things that I found beneficial was becoming a philanthropic advisor. So there's a program with Daylight Advisors, and there's other institutions that also offer certifications around philanthropic advising, and it just
Yeah,
makes you a better fundraiser, I believe.
yeah,
Looks into all of the questions around what inspires their philanthropy, what their goal to change the world is, and really gets you beyond the surface level of a meet and greet or a
yeah,
discovery call. Um, so there's a lot of resources online that can help you better understand how philanthropists think. And
Yeah.
I think
yeah,
the major difference, anybody can be a donor, but when you start asking the right questions about what change you want to see, that's when you become a philanthropist. And it's
yeah,
not necessarily about having hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to give, right? It's
yeah,
about being strategic with what resources you have, asking the right questions of the institution,
yeah,
and making a gift in a meaningful way.
yeah,
So I would urge you all to look into becoming philanthropic advisors as well.
yeah. Bree, Chris asked the question, how do you suggest that we connect with wealth advisors who manage donors don't DAFs? And I'm wondering if you have some suggestions around that. I
Well,
know
I mean, I think that that's exactly what we were talking about of,
yeah,
like doing that networking, right? Like the same work that you would do. I think connecting to those organizations, and especially if you
yeah,
already have somebody who's giving from a DAF, is learning a little bit more about the building. You are still stewarding and building those same relationships the way that you would with a foundation, right? It may not be a single donor, but I think about when when I was actually frontline working with organizations, and I had my contact at Schwab, right?
Yeah.
And she and I talked all the time. And there was one donor that specifically I would get the check from Schwab, right? And I needed to like call her and let her know I've gotten your check, but then my letter had
Yeah.
to go back to Schwab. But I would call
Sure.
Michelle, right? Michelle and I would have coffee. So it's that same sort of like cultivating those relationships with them as well, because then they're an advocate for you with their
Yeah.
clients as well. And I want to keep moving through this,
Yeah.
but talking a little bit more about these DAF donors, and Muhi, I really appreciate that framework of like from donor to philanthropist. And I think what's really critical about DAF donors is that they are extremely thoughtful, they are extremely strategic, right? And one of the benefits, not only like that initial tax benefit, but these sponsoring organizations, these community foundations have an expertise in investment and management, and it takes some of the administrative burden off of these very
Yep.
sophisticated donors who are thinking through how they go about finding granting organizations or organizations to make grants to, how they manage those processes. These organizations take that sort of administrative burden off. But that isn't to say that they aren't, that the originating donor isn't still involved.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, one of the things I think that is really important for you all to do is to call up your local community foundation or a deaf sponsoring organization and say to them, hey, I want to make sure that you have all of the correct information about our organization. Should some one of your DAF advisors want to make a gift to us? So, for example, what would you make sure that they have the correct name of your
your
organization?
EIN, right? Yeah.
The EIN. One of the things that causes a great deal of difficulty would be in national organizations that have branches.
Yep.
So, for example, your local branch may be the Girl Scouts, but your official name may be the Girl Scouts of Kootenai County, Idaho, as opposed to just the Girl Scouts. So you want to make sure, as Bree said, that they have the correct EIN number and the correct name of your organization. Because what you don't want to happen, guys, and I've seen this happen. You don't want your donor advisors to have to hunt for your EIN number. Make sure it's already at the community foundation or at the sponsoring organization so that when they put your name in, all that information comes up and the community foundation doesn't have to go hunt for that
Oh,
information. And someone mentioned Muhi, of course, talks about it being on your website, etc. All those things.
no. Yeah, and so I see some of the other questions in here. I think, Ali, to your question of when you receive a donation through a DAF, calling and thanking the organization, in the same way that you would manage a regular donor, understanding what their expectations are for stewardship and engagement. They may only want the tax receiving letter, the typical thank you note that you have, and it's possible that the initial donor that's associated does not want to be known. And so respecting and understanding that as well. But if they do, you are then stewarding two different a person in that organization. Um, Jack, I think in the interest of time, like let's move
Yeah,
on. Really good questions.
yeah,
And certainly
great.
we could go into this forever. I
Yeah.
think,
So,
go
yeah,
ahead.
briefly, you can endow a DAF, and it works like any endowment where the principal is held in perpetuity and you make gifts from the proceeds of that endowed DAF, and they are growing. And here's the thing, and I don't have actual statistics on this, although I've asked, it's not recorded, is the number of foundations that are converting from their foundation to a donor advised fund. And there are lots of, it's only it's not recorded. It's not required to be recorded, but I am seeing a lot more anecdotal evidence of that. So, for example, why would they do it? They would do it because they don't have to file their own tax return. They would do it because they don't have staff anymore. They're not required by the 5% minimum distribution. There's lots of reasons for them to do it. I like this description of a donor advised fund as a philanthropic investment account. And that's what it is, people. It's the donor who makes a DAF is creating a philanthropic investment account. Laura McDonald, who wrote the great book, on endowments, she says that one of the things she's seeing, and she wrote it in the Chronicle of Philanthropy as a prediction that they do at the beginning of the year, is that you're going to see more employee giving accounts creating to deaths. Like here in California, we have employee giving accounts like HP has one, or there's just lots of them out there. Chevron. So they're creating to doing more DAFs. And I don't think it's a stupid question. Can businesses make a DAF? Anyone can make a DAF. Absolutely. And we love that. I love that to happen. So accepting non-cash gifts, as I talked about that before, so I'm not going to belabor that. I want you all to note that DAF Day, this is the second year of DAF Day. It was created in 2025, and it was created by daftday.com. It was created by Chariot, but daftday.com is the place to find everything you want to know about DAF Day that's coming out. And I'm going to turn this over to Bree to talk about some things about DAF Day, and then we'll move through this
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, so I think knowing that DAF Day is coming up in October, and Jack, I don't know if you said this, but very similarly to like a Giving Tuesday, like
Yeah.
an anchored day for you to really focus and utilize for messaging with your donors, with your community. And so what are you going to do in this time between now and then? Educate your donors. Um, before you are asking anyone to give through their DAF, make sure they understand what a DAF is. I think oftentimes, when I was in my consulting role, we would meet with donors, and one of our specific questions was, "Do you give through a DAF?" Because sometimes they don't even think to ask if they can make a gift through their DAF. They have other philanthropic interests too. But then also educating your major gift donors, if they haven't thought about a DAF, how it can be a compelling vehicle to utilize. Maybe think about having a Q&A on your website. I'm actually seeing a lot more in the actual giving page on people's websites where you can click a box and say, I want to give through my DAF. And so making it really easy for those who do make gifts through DAFs. So think about what is the infrastructure that you need in place to either celebrate DAF Day or to begin receiving DAFs yourself. Encourage your board and your staff to learn the basics like you all are doing today so that they can continue to have confident conversations. But I also say you don't have to be an expert, but just know what to listen for in those cues, or how to start those conversations, how to connect people to more information. And as we've been talking all along, engaging with those financial advisors, you may consider having, I think one of the benefits that we as nonprofit organizations can offer to our investors, to our donors, is education. Do you have a webinar, whether it is about DAFs or maybe it's about planned giving, where you can talk about what those things are and then help them make that connection to your organization. Ask your current DAF donors to make a matching gift. Matching gifts, I think, especially in these sort of tentpole date-based campaigns, are really effective to drive engagement with other similar types donors. It is a leverage tool that you have to grow engagement, or setting those goals of, we'd like to hit this number of DAF gifts. But that match can also create urgency and excitement, and a clear reason for others to act. If you have a major donor that you do know gives through DAFs, that you have a strong relationship with, I would start that conversation before September so that you've got that in place for your materials as you're communicating out. Um, Similarly, build a marketing plan the way that you would for any kind of campaign, setting those goals. Like I said, maybe it's number of DAF donors, maybe it is amount of DAFs, however you're going to record your success against this. Um, a structured timeline, develop that content and their channels that you want to reach out, whether it's through your social media, making sure that maybe you've got a pop-up banner on your website or you're using Facebook or something like that. Um, Tempering all of that with, your resourcing and your timelines and what you have available to you. If you want to sort of dip your toe into this, what is maybe a low level effort, but estimating what you all can do with this, whether that's building out a full-fledged campaign, and really segment that message. Being really targeted with who either you already know your DAF donors are or who are likely candidates to be DAF donors, some of those major and planned giving donors, principal gift donors that you're already working with, that maybe you're targeting that message to. And be very, very explicit in that messaging, that you are recommending a gift from your DAF. Obviously we'll take gifts of any type, but around DAF Day, really being explicit about what you're trying to achieve. And then on
Wow.
DAF Day itself, making sure that you've got, very similarly to Giving Tuesday, messages that are either, oftentimes we're doing an AM and a PM send, or we're doing an AM and then a last chance email on the day after, some of those messaging tactics, making sure that you've got communication on all of your channels, whether it's you get on your website and you get the little confetti at staff day, or whatever your capabilities are. Obviously, like, temper that with what you have access to. Jack, are you going to weigh in on?
Yeah, I think you could go to a free webinar which is going to be presented by DAF Day. It's the
Yep.
DAF Day kickoff, right? It's June 10th. I registered for it. I'm going to see what they're talking about. It's how to do a marketing plan, all these other things. I think it's interesting. Last year on the very first DAF Day, it involved 4,000 nonprofit organizations and 30 plus DAF sponsors. So I'm going to be interested to see, what happens this coming year. And of course, we already told you it's October 8th, so you've got plenty of time, guys, to organize that DAF Day event. If it's the fastest growing vehicle, you want to be involved in it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know as a DAF sponsor, we are already sharing the messaging this far in advance with the families that we manage and the businesses that we manage DAFs
Nice.
for.
Yeah.
That's
I
nice.
was going to say on that, Mui, like, I think having those ambassadors, because I don't know, Mui, I'll ask you directly. I'm sure that you've got folks that are champions for this among your DAF donors, and having those conversations earlier, board members, personally inviting them to reach out to their networks. So is that some of the work that you're doing now too?
We definitely encourage, and our board members are great ambassadors for us in terms of inviting their friends to have donor advised funds, talk to them, host small gatherings, sharing more about DAFs. I think, even though they've been around since the early 1900s, their popularity has risen in the last decade, right? And within the Muslim community, even many have DAFs at Fidelity, Schwab, Charity Vest just because they don't know about AMCF.
Right.
But we're, again, very grassroots in our approach. We don't have a huge marketing budget, so we do rely on our network to promote
Yep.
it to their friends. So we're doing employee resource group presentations. I was just in Silicon Valley presenting at a few tech companies there. Their employees can do the matching, and all of these other ways to benefit and give from their assets and stocks that they receive RSUs, so restricted stock units, and giving that way as opposed to cash. So it's a lot of education, but I think once people hear it the second time, then then it clicks. So, it's all about education and spreading awareness and why DAFs are convenient, consolidating your tax receipt. Last month people
Yeah.
were scrambling to get donation taxes from charities. But think about how easy it is from the user perspective to just go into the
Yeah.
portal, download your history, send it
Yep.
to your accountant. The fact that it can be invested and grow for future years, that you get the
Yep.
tax deduction when you put it in. Again, so many use cases where it's beneficial for a family, and many DAFs don't have a minimum, right? So
Yeah.
you
That's
can
right.
test it out as a donor and as a user. Open a DAF, um, go to a platform that you like, that you align with, where you feel your values are reflected, and look at what investment strategies they have, whether you have control over the investments or not. All of these things are important. And I think once you start using a DAF, you can then better understand
Yep.
the donor psychology behind that as well, and
Yeah.
recommend it to your donors. I think all donors should have DAFs, right? So if you make a recommendation to your donors, you already know that they're giving to 5, 10, 20 other organizations, right? And if you make the recommendation to a donor who's already giving to your institution, here's some advice. Have you heard about donor advised funds? It seems like you might benefit. You're giving us $5,000 a year. I'm sure you're giving to many organizations, but you always just send us a check or make a donation online. Have you considered a donor advised fund? I think it would be
Yeah.
really helpful for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the way to find out if your donors have DAFs is to ask them. If you don't ask them, you're never going to find out. And I do like the suggestion to start your own DAF. I did that many years ago, and Louie and we've talked about this in the past. I just wanted to see how they worked. There are some minimum requirements, but as Louie said, there are some that have no minimum requirements. Could open a DAF with $100 or $50 or whatever. So I do advise you to look into that. We're going to move to questions. Generally, someone asked a question about a 501c4. DAFs cannot make gifts to endowments, in endowments to other organizations. They cannot make gifts to foundations. That is at this point prohibited. So I would be careful about looking at that. But one of the things I like about DAFs is the intergenerational way that it creates philanthropy. Many DAFs work with their families, their parents, their children, etc. I love that about that. Why don't we open it up to additional questions as we move along? I know there are some in
Jack,
chat. You got
I see
Go ahead.
Casey is asking the question that um, they feel like DAF sponsors are asking um, the organization to register or claim their organization when they've never gotten a gift through them. Is there an incentive and I'm thinking about oh gosh, what was the company? Was it GoFundMe that created a bunch of pages for everybody and said, oh, come in here and claim? And that was the big snafu. I don't think that
Yeah,
the similar situation. It's what Jack and I are talking about of like making sure that these organizations have your proper EIN, but also I would just say good standard practice to have on your website is like make it easy for donors to make gifts, right? Like this is what we want to be donor centered, make it easy for them to make gifts, whether it's to transfer you stock directly or, whatever it is.
yeah. And most DAF donors, when you get a DAF grant, they're a major gift donor. That's what they are. And they have an interest in your organization. Nurture them, grow them. Elizabeth, who's on this, she and I did a training in Western New York, AFP Western New York. And one of the things that I found out and why it's here in the slides now is that DAF donors, they make monthly gifts. They can make a monthly gift. Think about the motivations and characteristics of monthly giving donors. You find DAF donors who can make monthly gifts, you're in the sweet spot, and your donor retention rate's going to go much higher because
It-
DAF donors give over and over again to the same organizations. They're major gift donors, and they have an interest and they love your mission, vision, and values. Bree?
And at higher rates too, right? Like we see the average gift from DAF donors to be higher. And I think, to that point of once they have that set up. And oftentimes they may have like an annual distribution, but to your point, they could also have monthly distributions. There's a question here about planning succession for the DAF. Um, we just scooted up. Naming an organization as the beneficiary. Uh,
Yeah,
so
they could
I
do
guess,
that.
Debbie, I want to clarify, are you asking that somebody as part of their estate planning would close out their DAF, naming an organization as a final beneficiary, or are you saying that as part of their estate plan, they create a DAF um, with their estate? Because I think that is possible. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah, we often recommend many estate planning lawyers, and we actually have a network of philanthropic advisors, financial wealth managers, all to network around donor advised funds. So I think, when families are in a position to establish a trust, especially if it's irrevocable, name the DAF as the beneficiary so that the family has flexibility to change what charity gets the funds year after year.
yeah,
Um, I see Robert mentioning about giving donations directly to the charity, and that's easier for him. It's all about donor preference, right? If that's
that's
yeah,
what's
right.
easier for you,
Yeah,
then do that. But there are, again, are many benefits why to use a
yeah,
DAF as an individual. You get one tax receipt. You can
that's a
invest the
good
money
point.
for future growth. You get the tax deduction the moment you make the gift. You can hold a balance for many years. You can name
right,
your children as advisors. It acts like a family foundation without all the legal paperwork. So
right.
hopefully that
And
convinces you as to why you should have a DAF.
DAF donors can designate a successor advisor
Yes.
Mhm.
in the event of they pass. You could do that, and I love that because that's create. We're always trying to create philanthropists. That's what we do.
And
Okay,
next
I'm
gen
always trying. Yeah,
philanthropy
and
is
that's a great way to
so
do it by
important.
yeah.
Yeah.
Intergenerational, have your kids involved in the DAF, etc. I urge you guys to find and open your own DAF just so you can see how it works. Good. Any other questions in
Yeah.
there?
No, and Matthew makes a good point. Like, and so I think some of this is, the donor stewardship, this too. I hear both Jack and Mui saying, create a DEF, create a DEF. This doesn't necessarily need to be a sales pitch for DEFs.
No,
And
it's
and
okay.
I would say like this is more about you having the knowledge so that you can work with donors the way that they want to work, right? Knowing how they want to give, what the best vehicle. It's the same thing with understanding just broadly about planned giving and estate planning, how you can extend a donor's philanthropy, help them to have the impact they want to
Yeah.
have. And I think Matthew, to that point of helping to educate them too, of like
Yeah,
in your estate planning, you have a DAF donor. Have you thought about who is going to inherit that or what your plans are for that as part of your legacy? Having those kinds of, you become a valued, trusted philanthropic partner to your donors that you're working with. And I
yeah,
think you're exactly right. It's an unfortunate situation, whereas it's incumbent on us as fundraisers to know what's happening. And I think, Jack, that's all the research that you've done, the reading that you're doing, to stay on top of this too. Um,
So
yeah,
to Matthew's point about hundreds of millions out there without named successors, in my experience, if a DAF owner passes without any successors, the entity would use it as their grant making initiatives. So the money
yeah,
would still eventually get to a charity.
yeah,
I know in our contracts and agreements, we allow them to name beneficiary organizations right then and there.
right.
Or they can leave it to AMCF for our own grant making initiatives, or it can be absorbed into our endowment
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, I would just add like the Marine Community Foundation asked their DAF donors in the event that you pass, should we continue to make grants to the organizations that you have
Exactly.
made?
Yeah.
And that I think most community foundations, I think Fidelity and Vanguard also do that. They say we're going to spend down your donor advised fund and make grants to organizations that you've made to in the past. So I'm not sure if there's lots of money floating around out there. Trust me, it's going to be used some way or another. Having said that, we'll still answer questions. We still have another 20 minutes, but let's go to our summary and
Yeah.
tell you how to connect with us, and we're still around to answer questions.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that everyone at least has like a general idea of what donor advised funds are. This philanthropic investment account, right? We've covered a number of different terms, from granting organization to donor to sponsoring organization. So understanding all of those. And as Jack said, you'll receive these slides with our notes. So if you didn't write every definition down, they'll be available to you. Understanding some of the psychology and thank you, Muhi, for adding color to this as well of DAF donors, what their
Yes.
motivations are, and some of these strategies, especially as you're approaching DAF Day and how you utilize that. Another thing that we'll share with you after this is a few conversation starters, thinking about that initial solicitation of DAF donors, stewardship, cultivation of DAF donors. Want to make sure you have some talking points as you're starting to have these
Yeah.
kinds of conversations. And then also an organizational readiness checklist. I think what we've seen some of this in the chat is how do I credit people in my CRM? What kind of records do I create? What information do these organizations need from our organization for us to be able to receive DAFs? What are the things that you should have in place so that you know that you're ready as an organization to receive DAFs too? I think this is just
Yeah.
it just behooves you as an organization to have yet another way for donors to make their gifts.
Yeah.
Jack, anything else you would add to?
Yeah, I just would say this. Bree is in Phoenix. I'm in St. Louis. I don't know where Muhi is. I haven't looked at the chip in his neck
I
yet.
just travel so often. I think I share my location with you on my phone, Jack.
Okay.
Was just in
So
Vegas. Now I'm in
yeah,
Detroit,
yeah.
heading other places soon. So
So why I
got
say
to keep
this
it
is
fun.
give us a few days to put these up on our in our portal at the Fundraising Academy because I'm here until tomorrow and Bree, I don't know when you're going back to Peoria and Mui's
You'll
in
all be
Detroit, so
notified about when it's ready,
okay,
and where
yeah.
you can
We'll
access
notify the
it.
group. How's that? That will be great. In the
Yeah.
meantime, guys, connect with us. We are
Yes.
always loving you guys to connect with us on LinkedIn. It's definitely there's our two LinkedIn QR codes.
And I'll
And
drop mine in the chat. Just
yeah, do
mention
that.
AFP, or sorry, just mention Fundraising Academy webinar, and so I know.
Where you're
Yeah.
coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and definitely take a picture of that. And then Mui, I'm going to turn it over to you for these last few slides.
Absolutely. We were just talking about the online learning portal. So this is a great way for you to access our past webinars, read informative blogs, check out different toolkits and resources, and just conversation questions that you can have with your donors. So scan the QR code on the screen, or you can see the chat for the portal link. We want to be a resource for you. In addition to that, a lot of this will count towards your CFRE credits. So I know that's why a lot of you are here. So next up, we also have a fundraising essentials certificate. This one is a paid one, but everything else is at no cost. So if you have a professional development budget, consider partnering with Fundraising Academy for this self-paced learning, comprehensive training. And if you have more than one person on your team, there are pricing options to make it reasonable. And again, it's all covering the cost selling strategy and how to integrate fundraising into your organization from the board down to your staff and volunteers and everything in between. Thank you again to Bloomerang, who's committed to helping nonprofits build stronger, more meaningful donor relationships, and that is why Fundraising Academy is proud to partner with them. If you're interested in exploring a new giving platform, we encourage you to learn more about Bloomerang today by clicking or scanning the QR code. And next up, in June, I'll be presenting with my colleague LaShonda and talking about activating your board for fundraising success. So again, you can register at our website, and the link is in the bio. And we would love to see you next month. And I believe I will be in, I can't remember where I'm going to be. But I'll be somewhere interesting. We'll say that.
We'll get that. We'll figure that out. We'll know. We'll get that to you guys.
Yeah.
And thank you. And these are the references. You know, I love Ted Hart's book, The Daft Revolution. I urge you to read it. The National Study on Donor Advice Funds, a lot of statistics you heard about today is from the Daft Research Collaborative. The annual Daft report, and that's the updated analysis memo from the Daft Research Collaborative. I love the Chronicle of Philanthropy, January 2026. And of course, for Daft Day, see daftday.com and Chariot. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. We love you and we love the work you do.